Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. I'm Kylene.
And I am Patrick.
And Patrick is back.
Why did you laugh when you started?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so today, I'm excited about today. It's been, recently when I went through the, writing the show notes and kind of reviewing the episodes that we had done, I totally thought that when we walked through step by step in season 1, going through disclosure, I thought we had like an episode that was dedicated to talking about the polygraph. If we did, it wasn't in the title and I didn't really catch it. And so I realized so many people have asked, they ask me all the time. I get questions about, it's not like every day, but I've gotten so many questions over the years about polygraphs. And this is an episode that people have, I think, really wanted a little bit more guidance. And it's definitely things that I talk to my clients about, but I thought, why don't we make it a little bit more public, kind of what I share with my clients, with the caveat that everything we're telling you in this episode, I'm still highly, 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 highly recommending that you are working with someone. It doesn't have to be me, but that you're working with someone, a betrayal coach, a betrayal therapist, that your spouse is working with someone one-on-one, because even if you are trying to navigate this in a different way, if you're going to go the polygraph route, there's going to be a lot of emotions, and polygraphs can go really smoothly or they can be a little bumpy. And so I would highly recommend you have like emotional support available and people that kind of know this world to be able to support you through it and even to help you figure out the questions. Now, we're going to go into a lot of that today and hopefully offer a lot of clarity for you, why to do it, what kind of questions to ask, all of those sorts of things. But whenever possible, I'm going to recommend that you guys are working with a practitioner too.
So, but before we do that,
before we do that, we just hit 4 years.
Yeah, we just hit 4 years, and Kylene, you released a very beautiful surprise podcast episode. It was really kind. It was really it did take me by surprise. It did make me cry.
I said, what was it? Yesterday morning, I said, you came in to tell me you were leaving, and I was like, check the podcast. And you were like, I saw that. I'm going to listen to it. And I said, don't cry. I kind of knew you were going to cry.
Yeah. I already had when I saw it pop across. But, it's interesting. I actually leading into the 4-year anniversary, I didn't really think about it much. It wasn't really on my mind. And so I think I've really reflected on this. It's, there's two things that come up and in my mind, and it's, when you heal and you recover, you're returned to the life of mundane normality, right? And so what did I do on my 4-year anniversary? I got up in the morning, I went downstairs, I did my knee exercises because I'm still recovering from knee surgery, and I journaled and I did my morning routine without any sort of inappropriate thing. Then I came up and took a shower and I got ready and went to work. Completely normal, right? Completely normal. And so that's what recovery does for you. It allows you to return to a place where you can behave in a normal, appropriate way. Mm-hmm. And it can't and shouldn't be understated. It's a really, really important objective, The other thing I was thinking about, and I've said this a lot to men and things like that, is I think about you and how you held the vision. And so, for those of you who are addicted or doing the betraying, the reason your spouses, there's reasons why your spouses or significant others get so mad and are so hurt. And yes, it's the betrayal, and yes, it's the lying, but there's a component of that where they actually believe that you are more than what you are showing up as. So the dichotomy between what they discovered about you and what they believed you to be, that gap creates a trauma, and it creates anger, and it creates all of those things. but it also should be a destination, right? They want you to, and you did this for me. You held the torch while I went through the healing process. I couldn't hold it. I couldn't do it, early on. I needed to be detoxed. I needed to be held. I needed to be, told what to do. And then until I had enough wherewithal to click into my own healing process, right? And start and go there. But, through this whole thing, when we had some relational difficulties, you still felt like, no, my vision is this. And so for those of you who are going through this process, keep that in mind when your spouse is angry at you and is angry at the situation you're in. It's real easy to run. It's real easy to go. That's not controversial. But to live into what people believe you can be. That's what you did for me, and that's what 4 years really holds. So, yeah. So it's
it's so apt, Patrick, because you were in the Army, and it's be all you can be.
Yeah, I can be all you can be. So no, I mean, I'm serious. I think those are the things as I hit this major milestone. It's normalcy, and I'm starting to live into what you and other people and Keegan and all these people believed that I could be, or that maybe thought I was before, but I wasn't, you know what I mean? But now they believed I could be. And so I even messaged him on Friday, just thanking him for all the support. And, and he was like, Dad, you should be very proud of how far you've come. So,
I don't think you told me that.
No,
that's so great.
So thank you. Thank you very much, Kylene.
Yeah, well, I'm really proud of you.
I love you.
I love you too. Good job. Yeah. 4 years is kind of a big deal on both sides, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of a moment to reflect,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been a hard 4 years.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work.
A rewarding series of 4 years. We've learned so much about ourselves and our ability to heal. And give back.
I think one of the things that feels good about where we're at right now that has been a little frustrating historically through the 4 years is that I would feel like we were in a really good place, and then you would have a wound come up or anxiety or insecurity, and then you would think we're in a really good place, and then I would get triggered, right? And so it just felt like it was hard to make mutual or progress at the same time, or this, I don't know. It was hard to always feel like we felt good about the relationship at the same time, and that felt discouraging sometimes. And so I think what's really different about this one is, yes, we were making forward progress, but we kept hitting these different, I don't know how you would describe it other than I just did. It was just imbalanced, right? It's like the greatest example of that is when I asked you, I don't know, however long ago that was, I was like, do you feel like we're in a honeymoon period? And you were like, no. you were not in the same reality and same lived experience as I was having in that moment, where I was like, I thought we were doing really good right now. And you were like, it's in your head, it wasn't happening that way. And that hurt my feelings, right? So I think what's been interesting about the past couple of months is that we're finally clicking into that. We feel like we're at the same level. We're both feeling relaxed. We're both feeling safe. We're both feeling like it's a good place of healing. It just feels way more aligned emotionally, that we're not, I don't know if imbalancing each other is the right description for that. I don't know, but hopefully the way I described that, where it's like one of us felt really good, the other would sort of have a wound to work through, right? And we couldn't really seem to match up all the time. It was enough forward motion that we kept going, obviously, and year to year it kept progressively improving and getting better, but I think now it's like this season of we're in the same place where we can sort of rest and enjoy the recovery that we've achieved, without having too much of that the triggers or the insecurities or whatever sort of popping up to kind of quote unquote ruin it a little bit. So I think that's what feels a little different, if that makes sense.
It's interesting. You just told that story about when you're like, don't you feel like we're in the honeymoon phase? And I said, no. I remember feeling really, really bad. And I was like, man, I need to be careful with my words. I need because I don't want to hurt your feelings. But as you told that story, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, but I was honest.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to be. And so you can't, because if I could have faked it, like we were it wouldn't have been genuine.
Yeah.
And you would have picked up on that anyway. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. So as hard as that was for you to hear, and as hard as it was for me to hear that I hurt your feelings in that moment, because that's not what I wanted to do, that was a level of honesty. And you were being honest about how you were feeling, and I in turn was being honest how I was feeling. And sometimes that's just how it goes. You have to put that out there. You know what I
No.
mean? And then figure out, okay, what do we do with that? So, and maybe this will help with the segue into today's topic. I actually feel like after I passed this previous polygraph kind of with no problem, that it did kind of lock in a little bit more of our relational healing. It appeared to me, I kind of felt like there was a little bit like you were like, oh, okay, I feel good about this. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it just felt that way. You're not telling me.
Maybe that's it, your internal experience. Maybe you felt more relaxed.
Could have been, yeah. I mean, it's like my ability to go and pass these things, and you know what I mean. Like it's a big confidence builder for me. You know what I mean? Like
totally.
So.
Okay, so let's talk about the polygraph. It has been a significant tool in our recovery journey, and we do highly recommend it. But I'm going to be really honest. There are very, very bad polygraphers and bad polygraph experiences out there. So what we're going to try to do today, it's just like any coach, right? Any doctor, any therapist, any job has people that care and continue to learn and express empathy. And then there are people that have the exact same level of training and certifications and don't care and they're pushing their own agenda, or they have their own wound filter and they just aren't good practitioners, right? So it's the same as any other position, any other practitioner out there, right? That not all polygraphers are equal. And so what we want to do today is we want to kind of walk through why the polygraph, why is it helpful, how you can make it most effective for you if you choose to do it, what to look for, how to think through questions, etc. So this would be a great episode if you're thinking about the polygraph, to take a minute and grab a pen, grab some paper, take some notes. I know if you listen in Apple Podcasts, actually, if you go to the episode and you scroll down, there's actually a transcript. So that may also be helpful. Sometimes the transcript may not be 100% accurate with all of it, but it's accurate enough that you can maybe copy paste and edit for your own notes if that works for you. But just some thoughts here. We're going to kind of throw a lot of information at you. So taking some notes if you're thinking about this, maybe listening to this with your partner if you're heading that direction. And again, we're going to really, really encourage that both of you are working with individual support here if you're choosing that this is part of the route you go. Now, I will say not every CSAT and not every betrayal trauma coach is going to say that a polygraph is necessary, and some of them may even dislike the idea of it. So be aware that everyone has different thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. That's okay. We're going to share our perspective, our experience. And again, part of the reason that people may not like recommending polygraphers is because maybe they've been exposed to the bad experiences. So we do want to shine a light on that and highlight that. But at the same time, we're going to highlight the value of taking these. And I think when you choose a polygrapher carefully, and we're going to teach you some ways to maybe gain some of that knowledge and kind of like maybe even interview them and get an idea of like what their perspective is and what angle they're coming from, so you can feel a little safer with it. I think if you find the right polygrapher, it's really, I think, invaluable for the couple to go through this as part of healing. So let's dive in. So question number one, why take a polygraph? So the number one reason in my mind from the side of the betrayed partner is to rebuild trust. So when you're thinking about bringing in a polygraph, this is typically going to be initially around the disclosure. And beyond that, it may be as you're rebuilding trust and establishing consistency in the relationship. Couples choose to do it differently. Some may do it every 3 months, every 6 months, or what we chose to do after the first year was annually. Now, in my mind, that provided a little bit of safety. I felt like I could see and verify what was happening because Patrick was behaving differently, thinking differently, speaking differently, being consistent with his homework, going to therapy for whatever it was, 1.5 years, like very, very consistently. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm checking off the therapy box. I could see that, he was, like I said, talking differently, thinking differently, behaving differently. So I did have a lot of confidence. But, after depending on your level of trauma with the shock of what happened, you may have had total confidence in this person that, they never lie to you and that life was a certain way and then it wasn't. So there's just a reality to that rebuilding that trust is going to take some time. And for a little while to have that reassurance that they can't really pull one over on you. And that's kind of how I felt, was that I could see that he was doing all these things. And the longer that time progressed, it was like it would be really, 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 really hard for him to be that manipulative for that period of time. Something would have, like, some part of the floor would have fallen out if that was truly manipulative. So time does play a significant factor in that trust building, because for someone to be doing that level of recovery activity and change and all of that, again, your time is such your friend with betrayal and rebuilding trust, because if somebody is really being manipulative, they're not usually going to be able to withstand that consistently over time and keep it going. So I did know that. I did see that. And while I was kind of rebuilding that, because my trauma was significant, and I've shared that a lot, having that at the end of the year where I could go, I'm just going to confirm he's not lying to me about these things that he still could keep secret if he really wanted to. Like, he could still show me all of these things that he's doing and still, act out in the bathroom, whatever, and I wouldn't know about it. Maybe without porn because everything's locked down, but whatever. So I felt a little more secure knowing that he had to have this checkup basically once a year. So for the betrayed partner, I think it really helps rebuild that trust. And it also helped me really relax, because I kind of knew, hey, if anything happened, the max amount of time that I had to wait to find out if anything happened would be a year. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really think anything would happen. Yeah. But beyond that, the initial one that was very, 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 very important to me was confirming that what he told me in the disclosure was true. Because I was like, this was such a shock to me. This was such news. This was so destructive to my sense of reality. If I was going to, draw the line in the sand and go before disclosure and after disclosure, I wanted to make sure that it was complete and that it was honest.
On the addict side, denial is one of the things that keeps us in the behavior. So we minimize it. We say it's not that bad. We tell ourselves these little stories that is just a pattern of what keeps us in that noose of addiction. And so it's actually one of the components of that noose is denial, heavy denial or justification of what you're doing. So when you're forced to tell the truth, right? You think it through. I can just tell you what was going on in my mind as we got closer and closer to, the polygraph, and then the therapeutic disclosure was, have I really talked about everything? And it's hard because it was decades, right? You were not talking about a single event. You were talking about those because that's what you wanted. You wanted sexual history for essentially my entire life, right? So you're trying your very best, at least I was, to get all that out there, right? And to try to get there and answer the question. Like, I remember having that realization that when we would have discussions, I was like, I'm going to answer your questions. I'm going to answer them as best as I can, right? And as truthfully as I can. And because I had spent so much of my life trying to hide that secret, that was a hard muscle to overcome, a hard mental muscle to overcome. And so what the polygraph does is it allows you to, or it
pushes you into that reflection.
It pushes you into that reflection because, like, at least in my own mind, I was like, you know what? As hard as it's basically going to check, same thing you're saying. It's going to check what my level of truthfulness is, and so. I also was like, you know what, if you want a polygraph in light of everything I've done, then I'm going to give you a polygraph. And we talked about this the day before the first polygraph. You were almost, and I can't quite remember, you can probably remember it better than me, but you were almost going to let me off the hook. And I think I was like, no, this is the process.
I think I asked the question, are you sure you want to do it?
Yeah, I'm like, no, this is the process, because I don't know why. I think we've talked about this before. Like, I think I know how to be in trouble. Number one, like, that's just something that's been through my whole life. I'm like, sweet, I'm in trouble. I know how to do this. But also, second was like, no, this is important. If we ever have a chance to reconcile as a couple, I want us to be able to look at each other and say, hey, we didn't make it, but we literally did everything that we were supposed to do.
Right.
And to try to get there. And so that was in my mind too. And so after the first one, can I talk about how I felt after I passed?
Yeah.
Okay. After I passed, what really hit me, and it surprised me, I thought I'd just be like, see, I'm good to go. She should feel okay. Because at this point, I hadn't read you the disclosure. I had?
We did No, I had the information. The very, very, very first podcast was like 2 days before our full disclosure. And
Polygraph, not
or
podcast. You said
no,
podcast.
what?
You said the very first
The
podcast.
very first polygraph, thank you, was 2 days before our disclosure.
Gotcha. So it was before the disclosure.
Because,
yeah.
and that helped me with the disclosure because I went into the disclosure knowing everything I'm about to hear is like complete and accurate to the best of your ability.
What was really unexpected with me, and I remember leaving the place. I remember he was like, our polygrapher is very kind and stuff, but he doesn't tell you whether you passed or failed. So he was like, small talk, small talk, small talk, small talk. That's what I'm hearing. And finally I was like, hey man, did I pass? You know, he's like, oh yeah, you're good. I was like, oh, okay, great. And so I got in the car and I broke down, right? And I just broke down. And what hit me as I drove home was, I can tell the truth. I can go in and do something hard for a relationship, for my own healing. And it was a real confidence booster for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because what I had heard in your anger, disappointment, betrayal through this is, you lied to me, you manipulated me. You know what I mean? All of these things, and that was a consistent, and it was true. That's why it was a consistent message. It wasn't like you were just making this up, but it was true. So being able to go, okay, but I've turned the tables on that.
Right. Now. Yeah, it's a real opportunity for someone to actually step into integrity, maybe for the first time in decades, and say, okay, the truth is out there. And
that's an X-Files statement.
What?
The truth is out there.
Oh, I don't know. Okay. So to answer the question, why take a polygraph? One, rebuild trust, right? The second reason is what I recommend the betrayed partners put on the very, very, very first polygraph, besides checking that the disclosure is complete and honest, is, are there red line, non-negotiable items or behaviors that mean the relationship is over for you? And these are the ones that like will not get out of your mind, that you just, it will bother you until you die if you do not have the answer to this. And so one of those questions I typically recommend that people put on the initial polygraph is, was there any illegal or underage behavior? We want to be clear that sex addiction is a broad spectrum, right? So people that are good people doing bad things, people that are generally involved in pornography addiction and love their wives and want to do the right thing, are 99% of the time that does not cross over into sexual offender or illegal activity online or any of that stuff, where it does not typically overlap. However, sometimes it does. And that idea being planted in your head and never having an answer for that, that's just going to be really hard. So I recommend that question is on there. The other piece to that is, as technology has progressed and as the pornography industry has grown and gotten more explicit, you may go into a website for one reason and be exposed to something else that you didn't ask for. So whether someone was exposed to that voluntarily or involuntarily, sometimes that's still a question that's important to ask, because that could be traumatic for them, but then maybe they were involuntarily exposed, but then maybe did not leave right away, right? So understanding the depth to which somebody has been engaged in certain behaviors can be important. Again, you do not need graphic details in the disclosure or in the polygraph, but that's a question that I recommend. So I think it's important that it's to rebuild trust. The idea is, these are the questions that I have to have answered in order for my mind to rest enough for the idea of trust to even be possible in this relationship. And that's what I recommend going on the first polygraph. What I don't recommend using a polygraph for is gotcha. Like, I knew that happened. Like, if you're looking for the partner to fail, then this might be a situation more that you're moving towards separation and divorce, and not a full disclosure and not a polygraph. If you're moving towards disclosure, if you're moving towards a polygraph, it should only be because you want to know enough to offer to consent to stay in the relationship and to see if reconciliation is a possibility. So it really should be a trust building exercise, not something that is like, I'm trying to tear my partner down and I'm rooting for them to fail.
The one thing I would say, relative to illegal behavior or whatever that is, and just to put this out there, and I've heard stories of this, and I've heard stories of this, that when you are honest about illegal behavior, yes, you may suffer a consequence, but that is part of your healing too. You know what I mean? If you are that person, and I think it was Pure Desire had a podcast about how to, if you hear something in group, and I think the example was that group leader worked with that person, and that person ultimately turned themselves in, and they, whatever, I think they served some sort of consequence. But when they got out, they were healing. There was more healing. So I guess the point that I'm making is like your healing is worth it, and you never really heal
without truth.
And truth is and the spouse who's betrayed or is finding all this out, we have an obligation to, there's the notion of consent. She or he needs to know the story. She or he needs to know what has transpired in order to make a fully informed decision on whether to proceed in the relationship. And those red lines that you're talking about, or those non-negotiables, they're different for everybody.
Right. For someone else, it might be, did you have a physical affair?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And it might not even be anything close to being illegal. It might just be like, you told me it was pornography. Did you ever cross the line into physical affair?
Right. And you once again, we all suffer earthly consequences for the things that we do. But our ability to step into healing is what allows us to live a more fulfilled life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that, I think, answers most of question number one, why to take one, right? The goal is so that you have the information that you need, and you should be only really using it if you want to move forward if you have the thought that moving forward is a possibility, right? The second question is, how do I find one? How do I find a polygrapher? I get this question and I wish I had a better answer for you, so I'm going to do my best. This is a situation where I really wish I could tell you, look for this specific certification. These are the kind of people that are going to do really well, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know the answer to that. But what I will say is just, again, like any practitioner, any person in any industry, there's good ones and there are not good ones, right? There's ones that really care about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And maybe they have their own like mission behind it, but they're empathetic, kind people. We've certainly experienced that with our polygrapher. Then there are people that really are like, they have like the history of police interrogation and they transfer that into affair recovery polygraphs, and they just interrogate the person that's come in. And this is supposed to be a trust building thing, not a gotcha moment. So we are not actually encouraging, like, if you don't know that someone, this isn't I don't know if he cheated on me, I don't know if he's looking at pornography. Like, this is supposed to be paired with a full disclosure, moving towards reconciliation. So that's like a totally different scenario. And that is not what we're talking about at all. But there are people that will approach it that way. And so we would highly recommend that you avoid those people, because they're going to try to make someone feel nervous. And that's kind of the opposite of what we want to do, actually.
Right.
So what I'm going to recommend when you're talking about how to find one, word of mouth is always going to be the best. If you know someone or know someone who knows someone who has had a successful polygraph, then you'll want to go to that person. So the best scenario is if you're both working with a coach or a therapist in addiction recovery or betrayal trauma or whatever it is, that if they have somebody in their network or they know somebody in their network that works with a polygrapher regularly, because then you're going to have this, I know how they work. I know I can trust them. They've had successful polygraphs with this specific thing. So you're looking for somebody that is, regularly doing this type of polygraph around a full disclosure, who wants the person to succeed, et cetera. So word of mouth with somebody that is a professional in the industry of sex addiction recovery, betrayal trauma recovery, and they trust this person, that's always going to be the best. The alternative to that really is Google, right? You're going to Google, is there a polygrapher near me? Is there a polygrapher in my state, right? And you'll get a list of them. Now, this is going to move on to the next question, the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is, if you're Googling someone and you don't have a reference, you don't have a word of mouth, you don't have an example of how they've successfully handled the situation, that I'm going to recommend that you actually interview them. You reach out and ask some questions. And so I'm going to give you some things to look for and some questions to consider asking. So the number one question is going to be, do they do polygraphs around infidelity or disclosure regularly? Is that something that you're seeing on their website and that they handle regularly? Because it is different, right? A lot of polygraphers are retired police officers who did interrogation and did use them for those purposes. But then they shift into civilian world, and it took me a second to remember civilian. They shift into civilian work, and affair recovery and stuff like that tends to be or infidelity tends to be a very common thing that people will search for a polygrapher. So a lot of them will have that. But again, the angle at which they're coming at it is going to be important. So just because they say they do this regularly, that's not the only question we want to ask. We also want to ask them, what is their process? I want them to walk you through how they run the polygraph. Some polygraphers will come and they will say, you can ask as many questions as you want. Or they might say, I do disclosures all the time. You just bring in your disclosure and I'll read off of it. We are going to highly advise that if that's the answer they give you, that you walk away and find somebody else. The reason that that is bad is because there's a system that I'll kind of talk to you about in a little bit that is going to be much more accurate than if there's just a one-off question that the listener is not prepared for, and it could be worded any which way if the polygrapher just reads it off of a page. So there's a lot that could go wrong, a lot of false negatives or false positives that could be done when it's done that way. So we don't recommend that. So I am going to recommend that when you're interviewing or calling or emailing, that you say, hey, can you kind of break down what your process is? And they should have a process. They should have a systematic process that they're going to walk you through, and they should be able to explain that. If it's a free-for-all and they say you can have as many questions as you want, they can read off the disclosure, we would suggest walking away and finding somebody else. There may be some flexibility to this one, but within that system that I'm going to kind of walk you through, they really should max out on like 4 to 5 questions. I'm actually going to personally recommend, if they offer to give you more than that, that you still stick to 4 to 5, because let's say they say, oh yeah, you can have up to 6 or 7. 4 to 5 clear yes or no questions are really all you need to get the non-negotiables, the big questions, the trust building, the disclosure, like the kinds of things you have to know in order to move forward. Beyond that, most of the questions that you're thinking might be on a polygraph really are questions that should be answered in the disclosure. Right. So if we are using the polygraph to confirm that the disclosure is accurate, we don't need to be re-asking a lot of the questions that are on the disclosure. So I recommend, even if you have the option to ask more, that you keep it to 3 to 5, 4 to 5 questions.
One of the things that was really nice about our polygraphers' results was they were pass-fail. So I know of a situation of somebody I know whose polygrapher had a series of truthfulness. So it was like 87% truthfulness. He still passed it. Mm-hmm. But what that ended up doing is it led to questions of truthfulness from the spouse. Mm-hmm. So, my polygrapher always was just, he passed the test. Mm-hmm. And so because this is such a crazy emotional mm-hmm. scenario, I don't blame anybody in that situation, but it's if there's a door of doubt, because that's what betrayal and sexual acting out does, is it creates all kinds of doubt and distrust and everything like that. Like, that would be another question to ask, like, what are your results? Are they pass fail mm-hmm. or are they degrees of truthfulness? Because then it led to, well, what are the
right, what's the 20% that you weren't being honest about?
Right. And I can tell you, as somebody who sits in the chair, you have no idea. You're like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's just, so anyway, I think that's an important one too.
Yeah, that's a great one. So in the system that I was sort of describing that they should be able to explain to you, one of the things that you're going to look for when they're describing their system and their process, do they have check questions? So maybe there's a better word for that, but what I mean is, like, do they have a system of questions that they add to the questions that you ask, being some that you're going to answer truthfully, like, my name is Kylene, mm-hmm. and they establish that's a better word, baseline questions. So they have baseline questions that they ask every single person. So that would be like two or three questions that are truthful. I want you to answer these truthfully, and they're establishing your little feedback on the system of what truth looks like. And then they're going to ask you several questions and they tell you, I want you to lie to these questions, or these should be yes answers and I want you to answer no, whatever version of that is. But they're going to ask you questions that they want you to lie, and they're establishing the baseline of lying and what your, physiological reaction, how it looks on the computer, that sort of thing. So they should have baseline questions to establish that. If they're just like jumping into a question, again, we want a careful, systematic, someone that is establishing a baseline, somebody that wants you to pass, somebody that's not going to throw a curveball at you. So asking these kind of questions will give you an idea.
So he did two things with me. The first thing he did every single time was, when I sat in the chair and put everything on, was he said, pick a number between 1 and 7. And I would pick it. I would tell him what it was. And he goes, I'm going to ask you, is it number 1? Is it number 2? Is it number 3? When we get to the number that it is, you say no. So you say no to every single number, because then he can see what it looks like when you get to the one where you're lying. So that's like the first thing that happens. Then
and every polygrapher might have like a different question,
right.
But this is just an example of that, establishing that baseline.
Right. And then when I got in the polygraph, the things he would say is your name so-and-so? Will you, to the best of your ability, be truthful, or something like that? Those were the first two. And then he had a series of 3 questions mixed in with the 4 where he wanted you to lie. And in my case, they were always related to sexually acting out or the consequences of this behavior. So like this last one, he said, has there ever been a time where your wife has threatened divorce based on your behavior? And I was supposed to say no, knowing full well that was a discussion that we had, right? So you get to that point, you say no. And so then, of course, I'm sure that the system is going to, you know what I mean, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So the idea is they should have some sort of system to get a baseline that is not involving the questions that you have sent them in to take. The other thought process with that is, do they ask the questions that you bring multiple times? So that's one of the reasons that we don't like the idea of you're allowed to ask up to 100 questions, or I'm just going to pull a question off of the polygraph, because you could get nervous about a question, have a false fail or a false positive. And if it's not repeated multiple times so that you get a pattern established, then it could be exactly that, a false fail. And so, or a false pass or whatever it is. So what you want is the baseline of truth and the baseline of lying established in whatever system they use, however they choose to do it. And then do they have a process where they kind of ask you the 3 to 4 questions, they mix them up in different orders, but they should be worded exactly the same time, every time. They should be, you worked with your practitioner to create very clear yes or no questions. They are worded the same way, even if the questions are in a different order. And then we recommend that you send the polygrapher just to double check, hey, are these questions worded well for your system and for a yes or no pass fail, and get their feedback on it so everybody's on the same page that these are solid questions. If they have recommended adjustments, adjust before the session. But they should be clear yes or no. They should be known before you go into that room. They're not a surprise. And they should be asked multiple times in different orders, not different wording. And I'm saying things to avoid because I also want to let you know that if you do this interview and you think somebody is totally awesome and you go and then all of a sudden they're agitated, they're pushy, they're interrogating you, they're rewording things, you're not creating a calm environment, they want you to fail, you are allowed to leave. You do not have to go through this process if it is not a safe process for you.
Right. Yeah. This is not a criminality thing, right? Sometimes maybe when you were,
those situations will cause
right
false passes and false fails.
That's right.
So we don't want you to sit through that. You have the autonomy to get up and leave.
Yeah.
So we want you to find somebody that is safe.
Yeah. And once again, think about, you always got to keep in mind, what's the objective here? The objective is not to terrorize and traumatize you so much that, you know what I mean? The objective is to come out of that going, wow, look at us. Look at what we've done. Or in the case of a fail, maybe there's some cleanup that has to happen. You know what I mean? There's something that's going on that we got to kind of get back in. And I've heard of that happening too, where it's like, man, I was unexpected. Something came to mind and
you're in the moment, right, and you had the question in advance, but when it was asked in the polygraph chair, all of a sudden your brain went everywhere.
Yeah, right.
That can happen too.
Yeah. So Yes.
But what you don't want is a polygrapher who goes, oh, you're having trouble with this question? Why are you lying? What is wrong with, and they jump into interrogator. That's not the point.
Mm-mm.
That's not the point
job.
at all. It's not their job is to be accusatory. The job is to go, okay, why is this question, tricky? Is there a way that this could be worded better? So it could be more accurate, or like what's going on here? Because sometimes it is just, and I would say especially like I have a brain that like goes all the time and you don't, but that one time that you took a polygraph, it did go on that. It like all of a sudden was like ruminating because you were like hyper analyzing if there was any way that you were lying to this question.
Right. Yeah.
For whatever reason that it just stressed you out. But like if someone is like that all the time, then having someone that is being sort of antagonistic could be extremely stressful and cause like not great reactions, as their brain is trying to process everything. So we want a calm environment. We want somebody that's going to be like, hey, are you wearing a watch, or do you have a phone in your pocket, or is there anything that's buzzing or that will make sound? We want to leave those outside of the room. We want a comfortable space. We want somebody that is going to talk to you respectfully. Okay. So again, if you go and these things aren't happening, you don't have to do it. We encourage you to find somebody else and try again. So again, what to look for, questions to ask to find the polygrapher. You're looking for somebody that does infidelity and disclosures regularly, and they have a max on the questions you can ask. They will not reword them. They should have baseline questions to establish truth, to establish like lying in their system. They should ask the questions multiple times. They should really want you to pass. That you should get the vibe that this is somebody who's just looking for truth, and they don't prejudge you when you come in. They don't know what the truth is. They're just looking for the truth.
So a recommendation for the person who's going to get the polygraph, and this happened 2 times ago. So what happened in that one question was after he and I got to talking about it, he changed the wording because he was like, yeah, it was kind of a bad question. He changed the wording, and then we stepped out of the polygraph room, and I said, can you call my wife? Because I felt like it would be better coming from him telling you than from me coming to you, right? So when you go to these things, sometimes things are a little bit, it's a human being interaction, right? And human being
my interactions with him have always been good. He's always been very like kind, considerate, gentle on the phone, wants to make sure, he wants both of us to succeed.
That's
really.
right. That's right. Yeah.
And he always wanted to make sure that everything, like my questions were answered. Because the very first time that you went, I think he called me and was like, I think he said, do you have any questions or anything like that?
Right.
And then, So very positive experience there. And that's what we want for all of you. Okay. So let's talk about jumping into best practices for creating the questions. So again, I'm going to encourage you to do this with somebody who's familiar with this process, and I'm going to encourage you to send them to the polygrapher ahead of time to get feedback. But that being said, you can do a lot of groundwork thinking through, what is most important for you? What are the non-negotiables? What are the biggest questions you want to ask? So what I recommend is that if you're going to do annual polygraphs, those questions are different than the initial polygraph. So once you have the answer to, is the disclosure complete and accurate, you don't need to answer that again, right? Like you don't need to ask that question 6 months later. Once you have the answer to illegal behavior, you don't need to ask that 6 months later. After that, you're asking more about consistency, about relapsing, like, is everything good, right? So I'm going to give you just some thoughts around creating the questions. Then I'm going to walk you through the groupings of questions that were we did like kind of around the initial disclosure and then the annual questions. So best practices for questions. Number 1, plan ahead of time and make sure that the partner taking the polygraph has the questions in advance. We already talked about that, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but it is important because we're not trying to trip them up. We do want to make sure it's sort of like when we talk about defining terms with each other. I don't want you to come up with a question and there's a word in there that you interpret one way and your partner interprets differently. So make sure that all of your terms are defined. Make sure you give your partner the questions ahead of time and say, hey, do you have any questions or any doubt about what I'm trying to get at with this question? make sure that they go, nope, I know exactly what you mean there. Because again, what we don't want when you're in a polygraph chair is confusion. We want them to know exactly what you're going for. We want them to be able to answer that question, and we want them to confidently be able to say yes or no. We do not want it thrown at them last minute, and we don't want a question that they're like, I'm not really sure what she means by this word. Okay, so definitions and clarity is really important. So give your spouse, their therapist, the polygrapher, the questions in advance. Make sure your partner reviews them and asks you any questions. That's going to be very important. Make sure that you are limited in your questions. Again, whether they give you more flexibility, I'm going to recommend that you stick to 4 or 5. Follow-up polygraphs.
Could I say something? Make sure you don't do compound questions. So like you don't want to have a question where the first part of the question could be a yes and the second part is no. Like the whole question needs to be self-contained, and that yields one yes or no answer.
Yes, that's a really good clarification. So clear yes or no, and follow-up polygraphs may have different questions, so just sort of be aware of that. This is very, very, very important. You're going to want to avoid questions that involve thoughts or feelings. So you want to make sure that you are not asking questions that ask them to analyze their thinking process or to explain feelings to you. Now, someone might listen to this and go, can I ask if they had an emotional affair? Yes, that's a yes or no factual question. But what you're not going to want to do is have them analyze thoughts and feelings behind or intention behind different behaviors and somehow word that in a yes or no question, because there's a couple reasons that that's wrong or not helpful in a polygraph and can go poorly for you. One is that that is one of those types of questions when you're asking them about thoughts or feelings that can get very complex in their brain, and they might spin out in the chair trying to be honest, thinking about analyzing every different thing, trying to give a yes or no answer to it. So it's a little too, thoughts and feelings are a little too complex for yes or no.
I was actually thinking a good example possibly is, did you engage in this behavior because you really didn't like me?
Right.
Where they're at in their therapeutic process, they may not have fully figured out why they fully were engaging in the behavior, and that throws them off.
Or maybe, like, did you? Maybe not. Did you not like me? Because if they're going through this, the answer would probably be no. They do like you.
I know,
but more might come to the betrayed person's mind is, engage. Did you enjoy this behavior more than me, or how did you feel did you experience these emotions when you were thoughts and feelings around the behavior and their interpretation of it can be tricky.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to pull shame out of it. You're trying to pull guilt out of it. You're trying to just go
yes or no.
Yes or no.
The other thought process with that though is, once someone has gotten into recovery for a significant period of time and they're not actually engaging in the behavior, and they haven't for a long time, a question that involves their thoughts or feelings can actually be asking them to revisit the version of their brain that was in existence like 2 years ago. Not only is that difficult to do, think about, it's kind of difficult for us maybe to do in different ways, right? Okay, what was I thinking on July 21st of 2022, and how did I feel about that exact moment? That's hard. But also, when somebody's in recovery, the way their brain worked in addiction is different. So there may even be this complexity of them trying to answer honestly, but now being confused because they feel like a different person. They think very differently, and their answer today might be different. It's just not good for a polygraph, which again, if you want any clarification on these things in some kind of way, that's more of a conversation or more of a question that should go into the disclosure. And then you have, was the disclosure complete and accurate as one of the polygraph questions? That's a factual question, yes or no, like, have you been honest, right? So that is a very, 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 very important thing to know, that we want to avoid thoughts and feelings on polygraphs because they are very, very difficult to get clear yes or no answers on. They're very complicated things, and they're highly likely to give you difficulty in passing. and be successful with that. So those are a couple things to think about in terms of creating the questions. Now I'm going to give you an example of some of the initial questions. I couldn't find the actual list. I actually think I have it in my What's Next course. If I had pulled up that video, I probably have it. But these are going to be similar to and kind of cover the content of the initial questions. So this would have been around disclosure. Right when that this would have been the very first polygraph. And the types of questions I chose had to do with, one, is the disclosure complete and accurate to the best of your ability? So I think that should be on every first polygraph. Is the disclosure complete and accurate to the best of your ability? 2, did you engage in any illegal or underage activities? 3, did you ever engage in any physically sexual behaviors since we've been together with another person? Those are the kind of questions that were on polygraph number 1. Those kind of boundaries there.
I think I thought you had another one there. It was have you told the truth to the best of your ability? I know that you had the one about
disclosure.
Yeah, but I seem to remember, have you told the truth?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
So those are kind of what were on the initial. So then after that, again, we don't need to ask about the disclosure again. We don't need to ask about the underage activities again. We don't need to ask about the physical affairs again if those were all on the initial, right? But these are the questions that we would do annually after that. Number 1, have you relapsed, slipped, or acted out since discovery? Now, this is, again, why I encourage my partners to have clear definitions for what all of those words mean. Mm-hmm. Patrick and I really knew what relapsed means. He knows what that means to me. And we talked about, what does the slip mean? What does acting out mean? A couple different ways of saying similar things, but also covering bases. So slipping or acting out might be a little different than a full relapse. So really sitting down with your partner, understanding their behaviors, which you should have a clear perspective on with the disclosure and everything at that point. But really defining, what does this look like? So then you can check at the end of every year, which is what we did. Have you relapsed? Have you slipped? Have you acted out since discovery? That should be a clear yes or no question. Number 2, have you viewed, downloaded, purchased any material, movies, or apps that are pornographic or sex related in any way since discovery? So there's a couple things with this here. I'm clarifying materials that were used previously for acting out and just clarifying that these are not things that have been used. I'm also putting a date on it, since discovery. Mm-hmm. So since I found out, have you done any of these things? Okay. And one of the things you could do if you choose is every year you could go since the last polygraph if you wanted to do that, or you could just keep it since discovery and cover your bases. Mm-hmm. Number 3, have you masturbated or engaged in any sexual behaviors or fantasies without your wife since discovery? So these are specific behaviors that maybe you have agreements on, and you want to kind of just make sure that, they could be answered in number 1, right? Relapsing, slipping, acting out, but it's another very, very specific question. It's clear, it's yes or no. Number 4, have you engaged in affairs, touching, flirtations, or any behaviors with the person in the physical or virtual world? Clear yes or no answer. And you could say since discovery or whatever that is. Okay. So those are just some examples. These do not have to be your questions. But again, having them be very, very clear yes or no. If they're after the initial polygraph, having them have a date on them, since X date, since last year, since last polygraph, since discovery, whatever that is. Those are some suggestions for you. And then the last question we're going to wrap this episode up with is the polygraph helpful for healing?
Is that for me?
Yeah, well, both of us.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely. It kind of goes back to what I was saying, being able to show up and be electronically checked on your honesty, because that's what we lack when we're an addict. We lack integrity. Our private life does not match our public life. And so it allows us to say, hey, no, I'm actually still private and public. It is what you see. They're all the same. And I'm continuing to do well. So it absolutely, I would hope that it helped you through the last 4 years too, to know that I was, like you said, the longest you had to wait was a year-ish, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so you knew that I was going to come up on a check here. And, I would imagine it also because I passed 5 of them. So mm-hmm. I would imagine that I would hope makes you feel better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I would say too, there have been situations where a spouse says, "Hey, I'm interested in a polygraph, and I think I'm going to pursue that," and more information comes out because of that. To your point earlier, where you were like, "I know this is coming up. I really need to do some self-reflection about how honest I've been." There are situations where if the polygraph is on the table, more honesty happens.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's a valid thing to consider if you are somebody who really needs to know that your partner is, really laying it out on the table for you.
Right.
And again, we don't want these disclosures to be graphic. We don't want them to be extra traumatizing, but we do want you to have the truth. That is very important. It's the baseline of a healthy relationship, is to be honest with each other.
And you said it earlier, you shouldn't demand your spouse go get a polygraph out of retribution.
Right. So then the benefit for the betrayed partner, I think I kind of introduced that concept earlier on, but it really did provide me a lot of peace of mind. It allowed me to kind of trust that what I was seeing was true. I could watch the behaviors. I could kind of verify that, okay, these things are happening. I'm seeing them happen consistently. I'm seeing them happen consistently over a long period of time. I'm not just seeing behaviors. I'm also seeing like actions and words and thoughts shift over this course of time as well. And then just to kind of tie all of that together, I'm going to ask a couple questions to make sure nothing's falling in the cracks, And so with those processes in place, I was able to relax more and more and more each year, to the point that I did mention to Patrick after this last polygraph, I was like, I don't know if we will do one again. I like having it in the background as an option of, if anything crazy ever happened and I was like, I don't know if something's happening right now, it's available. Mm-hmm. But we've done so much work at this point, and there's been so much consistency and so much trust laid, we may not pull on it. But for the period of time that we used it, I really do think it was incredibly valuable. And it really helped both of us. To your point, it affirmed your integrity and helped you feel good that you could go through something hard and tell the truth and get validated in that. And for the betrayed partner, it really helped me trust that what you were saying and what you were doing and what you were showing me throughout the year was true and sincere. And so then I could really build on that over time. Yeah. Okay, this was intense. This was a lot of information. I hope that it was helpful. There's a lot to think about as you are approaching this. I would, similar to the idea of disclosure, if you have a friend or a family member or somebody that maybe you could have on your team, if you're going to go through a polygraph for the first time, that you can talk to afterwards, for the person taking the polygraph and for the betrayed partner. You guys are definitely going to want to connect and talk to each other and break it down and everything. But if you can have individuals from your own support systems to be there, just in case anything is a little bit stressful or overwhelming that day. You may not need that, but it's always great to have that safety net there. So hopefully that this information today will help you find a safe polygrapher, a kind polygrapher, somebody that's on your team and wants you to succeed. It will hopefully has helped you think of some questions that you want to ask and will be a really important trust building activity for you.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.